Hello and welcome to the first inaugural episode of the NBA with KJ. Um, this is a podcast that I've been really excited about starting up, and it's something I'm really passionate about. And I think you guys, whoever you guys are, it's no one right now, are really going to enjoy this. Um, to give you a bit of context, the NBA with KJ is going to be a basketball podcast focusing in on the NBA, but we're also going to cover a pretty wide range of topics ranging from college basketball, high school hoops, international ball, stuff like that, anything relating to the game of basketball. Um, Today's first episode is coming at an interesting time because today it is pretty much the end of the first day of the moratorium for NBA free agents. And in this episode, I'm going to be going through every single free agent signing or contract or trade that has happened today. Today is the 2nd of August, and I'm going to be giving my thoughts on them and some analysis. So without further ado, we're going to start off with the first thing that happened right at the start of free agency, which was Lonzo Ball to the Bulls. Now, people are really excited about this deal for good reason. Lonzo has turned into a hell of a player. I think he's inconsistent sometimes, but you're inconsistent in an inconsistent role, right? Which is sort of what he had with the Pelicans. He didn't really mesh with either coach. Van Gundy, it was tough for him to work with Van Gundy, I think, a lot of the time. And before, he was sort of fighting for minutes with Drew Holiday. So now in Chicago, he's going to be at the front of the rotation, assuming they put him at the 1. And then at the 2, you can have sort of whoever at the 3, Zach LaVine. If they keep Markkanen, which I doubt, but if they do, you'd have Markkanen at the 4 and Vucevic at the 5, which is a bit of an awkward fit. And I think as a whole, Lonzo brings the element of playmaking that I think the Bulls needed. He's a good player. He can guard pretty much 1 through 3 effectively, and then branch out onto guarding a couple power forwards. But he's not going to be guarding a lot of people down low. But the point is that he's a very switchable guy. His shooting looks good on paper. And him next to Zach LaVine, I think, is going to be interesting. We'll have to see what Kobe White does this season because he's going to be inevitably a 6-man type role. And if Lonzo's healthy, this will be an excellent roster with a later addition that I'm going to discuss of Alex Caruso. I think these guys are going to make the playoffs. And realistically, I think you're looking at a similar team to the Atlanta Hawks this season, where you have a mix of veterans and young guys that just mesh really well with each other and can just create effective offense and, hard-nosed defense. So I think this is a pretty good pickup, in my opinion. Kyle Lowry to the Heat. As well as PJ Tucker to the Heat. And they signed Dwayne Dedman as well. And I have to say, man, this may be a controversial opinion for some people, but I think you put these guys versus the Nets, and it's a 4-game series, man. Honestly, this Miami Heat team has some of the most hard-nosed, tough guys in the league. They're just unstoppable, honestly. Bam Adebayo at the 5, with his playmaking, and if he can add a semblance of a 3-point shot, sort of like how Giannis has. At the 4, if you put PJ Tucker at the 4, Jimmy at the 3, Duncan Robinson at the 2, and Lowry at the 1, I mean, sheesh, man. That's a defensive nightmare for opposing teams, with the exception of Duncan Robinson. And you just have so much switchability and offensive versatility in that starting lineup. And, we don't even talk about their bench because, their bench is just full of like good players. Their bench could be like a mediocre starting 5. And I just think Miami is going to be a heck of a team. And they're in the running to beat the Nets. I think conference finals is a realistic preseason expectation, but seeing how it goes, if everyone stays healthy, I think this team can make the finals again, honestly. Next move was the Jazz retaining Mike Conley. I don't like this move at all, and I don't like the Utah Jazz either. I'm sorry, Jazz fans, but this just happens every year with the Utah Jazz, where it's like, man, they added someone or they're keeping this person. And at the end of the day, like, the core any core centered around Rudy Gobert, I don't think in the modern NBA is going to be effective because he's not an offensive player. Rudy Gobert fundamentally is not an offensive player. He can catch a couple lobs, but his post game isn't really like excellent, which is what separates him from guys like Dikembe Mutombo or Shaquille O'Neal. I hate to mention them in the same breath, but guys like Patrick Ewing, even, who are excellent defensive and offensive players. And, you could also compare him to the likes of a Dwight Howard type guy. And even then, Howard has post moves and offensive potential, and Gobert just doesn't. And Donovan Mitchell's a heck of a player, but it pains me to see him being surrounded by Gobert and now Mike Conley for the next 3 years. If he keeps up this pattern of having injuries like we've seen sort of progressively over the past few seasons, I think this is going to just be a nightmare scenario, and they're headed for that, like I said, nightmare position of being like how the Orlando Magic were a couple of years ago, where they're just this average team with good players that don't really mesh together, and every year it's like first round or second round and they're done. And fair play to the Jazz. I think, going heading into the playoffs, I thought they were going to win the championship, honestly. But then they did what only the Utah Jazz could do, and they sucked and lost in the second round, which is pretty much tradition at this point. Jimmy Butler, $184 million extension. Love it. Heck of a player. We'll have to see how he ages. I think he'll age fine enough. He doesn't rely on his athleticism that much. He's a developing playmaker. His jump shot's been interesting. Because he had a terrible jump shooting season during 2019, and this year he was fine. I don't have any problem with them extending him. I mean, you only get players like this every once in a while, and loyalty is a heck of a thing in the modern NBA. Tim Hardaway, 4 years, $72 million. Tim Hardaway is one of those guys where it's like he can give you like 25 5 and like 5 on a given night and shoot like 50% from the field and like 40% from 3, and then turn around and score like 13 on like 32% shooting the next night. I mean, he's just a smaller Celtics Jeff Green. He's just an inconsistent player. I will say his 3-point shot creation is phenomenal. I think he does have potential getting to the rim. It's just, is this the guy you're putting next to Luka if Porzingis leaves? Are you expecting Jason Kidd to come in, and if they do end up trading Porzingis, which I hope they don't, are you expecting Jason Kidd to have a roster of basically Luka Doncic and Tim Hardaway, and Tim Hardaway is the second best player on a team in the Western Conference? I mean, with his defensive pedigree, Jason Kidd, and the lack of real offense on this team, it's tough for me to approve of this. I would have thought they'd let him walk and go for Lowry, but Lowry went to the Heat. I would personally say, you try and retain Porzingis at all costs. I'm saying it now. Porzingis, if he can just get in a good groove and have a good year, is one of the best second options in the league, because he's this, excellent jump shooter. He can get inside on the glass conditionally. He's a big dude. And if he can just get back in rhythm, I think, it could be a good team under Jason Kidd if they sort of went in the direction that they went in 2019, where they were trying to just be this offensive team that, kills you with the offense. And now that Luka Doncic has improved, and if he continues to improve and can, make free throws and be moderately better on defense, I think it can be a good team. But Tim Hardaway, I don't love it. Speaking of things I don't love, Jared Allen, 5 years, $100 million. You are spending $100 million on a player that has a skill set that a lot of guys in this league have for a vet minimum. We're going to have to see if he stays healthy. If he stays healthy, that's one thing. But the other thing is you have Evan Mobley that you just drafted, a defensive-minded 5, and you have Jared Allen, who is a defensive-minded 5, and you have 2 defensive-minded 5s. You don't have a real play. I mean, Ricky Rubio is your best playmaker, but are you going to start Ricky Rubio? And if you're going to start Ricky Rubio, are you going to start Evan Mobley or are you going to start Jared Allen? Are you going to play them next to each other and hope Jared Allen's three ball pans out? Maybe. And then I suppose you can put Isaac Okoro in the starting lineup if you really think that's a good idea, and Darius Garland, and have that fill in as your starting line with Rubio, Garland, Okoro, Allen, and Mobley. But the spacing's terrible with between Rubio, Allen, and Mobley. So I don't think they do that. And Mobley's most likely gonna come off the bench and maybe do a James Wiseman type thing where he just comes in these bursts. And I think the Cavs are not doing this correctly. They're retaining players that you're supposed to trade for future picks. And I understand they've been rebuilding for a few years here, but I mean, they Kevin Love's still on the roster. Like, if you're trying to rebuild, you're not doing it by having Kevin Love on your roster and you're retaining Jared Allen, who's a guy that like can be a piece, but also like, what is he giving you now that you can't get elsewhere for cheaper or younger, right? That's just my thoughts. I can't tell if this is going to work out or not for them. Next is Nerlens Noel, 3 years, 32 million, New York. I love Nerlens Noel. I was hoping he'd come to the Lakers on a minimum. That's unrealistic, and that's just part of being a Lakers fan is having unrealistic expectations. I mean, might as well expect Kawhi to sign a vet minimum at this point, honestly, with the way the roster is panning out. But I'll get to that later. It's not all bad for the Lakers, but I'm talking about the Knicks right now. This team is going to be weird. Nerlens Noel's a hell of a player, though. He's defensively, I think this is in a couple years a DPOY candidate, or maybe even this coming year. Uh, Excellent lateral movement, excellent shot blocking, very smart. Is it an overpay? We'll have to see. This is one of the guys I was talking about with the Cavs who you can get for cheaper and can do a similar thing because Noel's better on defense than Jared Allen. And if you're the Cavs, going back to them, are you looking for defense with Allen? Because if you're looking for defense, you should have just signed Nerlens Noel, right? So I'm confused as to exactly what the Cavs' plan is. I am continuing to make this episode about how much the Cavs are not doing a good job constructing a roster, but I'm going to try and just focus for a second on the Knicks. They don't have a lot of players on their roster right now that I think can get a championship roster constructed. But if RJ Barrett improves, maybe he can be a good star player. But Nerlens Noel is a lot of money for a guy that's not really contributing to like the difference between you winning the game and losing the game. I think is a bit of an overpay. I would have let him walk personally, and because the big question here is Mitchell Robinson, right? What are you going to do with Mitchell Robinson? Because he had a heck of a season for them when he last played before he got injured. And now you have Nerlens Noel coming back. And are you going to let Mitchell Robinson walk? Are you going to, waive him? Are you going to buy his contract out? Or what's happening? Is he going to come off the bench? It's just confusing. They have a lot of defensive guys, which is good under Thibodeau. But I don't understand, like, you fill up all these guys, on the roster who can play good defense and are like fine on offense. And in the playoffs, as we saw versus Atlanta, good defense works, but you have to have good offense too. And Nerlens Noel is not a good offensive player, and we'll have to see is all I can say. Kelly Olynyk to the Pistons, 3 years, $37 million. Kelly Olynyk's probably in top 5 players currently in the NBA. So I'd expect the Pistons to finish at about the top of the Eastern Conference. Realistically, I think this is a good signing. I like the idea of pick and pop with Cade Cunningham. But the real question is Killian Hayes for the Pistons, because he's one of those guys where he's looking like a Dante Exum type situation where he's billed as this like, you got this lengthy point guard who's quick. He has kind of a jump shot. He can get to the rim. He's a good playmaker. And just like Dante Exum, he got injured. And then when he plays, it's like, okay, like you just shot like 1 for 13 and scored like 5 points. Like, what's happening? Why are you on the roster? Why'd we draft you? And if they retain Jeremy Grant, I think the idea of Hayes, Cunningham, Grant, someone at the 4 and Olynyk at the 5 is an interesting lineup for spacing, because honestly, if you could have Killian Hayes sort of shift ideally into like a Patty Mills or Kent Bazemore type role of just a guard who can knock down shots, and have Cunningham and Grant initiate the offense, especially Cunningham. I would love to see what he can do from a playmaking standpoint. But if you can run out that lineup, and I guess you could play Dumboya at the 4, but I really honestly cannot tell you who the Pistons have available at the 4. I'm sorry. Um, but it's interesting from an offensive standpoint. From a defensive standpoint, this is a terrible lineup, and the Pistons are not going to be good again, and they're probably going to be back in the lottery next season. But this is just what Kelly Olynyk is as a player. He's a guy that you sign to just be a guy on your team, and you don't really expect a lot more. Next, we're looking at Boban Marjanovic back to Dallas. This is a locker room move. This isn't a basketball move. I like him as a player. He's not like a good basketball player, I guess, if you're talking about team, and he's fine. He truly is an excellent offensive player. And I mean that in all seriousness. He's an excellent player offensively. He's just so bad defensively that you can't play him. And for Dallas, it's a player everyone likes on the roster, sort of like JJ Barea. Everyone likes him. He can play spot minutes at 5. Luka likes him. He's a good relationship with Porzingis. What can you say? It's a no-brainer, right? Campaign 3 years, 19 million to the Suns. Absolute steal. Phenomenal playoffs. Let's see what we can do in the regular season. A full year with consistent minutes for campaign, I think will be interesting. He's turning out into a heck of a player. I remember in that Lakers series, down the line in the finals as well. He just has these really timely pull-up threes, and a lot of the times you put campaign in there to have this. They run this sort of play a lot where when the other team scores, whether it be a 2 or 3, you just have campaign run up and take like a pull-up 3, and it's not as much of a basketball move, but it's a incredible like momentum play. And he does this all the time where he just pulls up for 3 and makes it and then gets back on defense, clapping his hands. He reminds me of Patrick Beverley sometimes in his presence on the court. I think it's an incredible signing by the Suns that they were able to get him for this cheap, because, you look at a guy like Tim Hardaway, where he's getting like $30-something million, and I view campaign on the same level as I do Tim Hardaway. He's a guy that will bring you things on offense, things on defense, versatility, but at the end of the day, he's there to play his role, right? And I think that's what campaign's going to do. He's going to be an excellent role player for the Suns. Trae Young and the Hawks, $170 million extension with a $201.5 million supermax trigger. He's going to be the best point guard in the league in a couple of years, him and Luka. So no brainer. If the Hawks didn't extend him, that may be one of the worst moves all time. So this is a logical move. Now, my question is, do you extend John Collins? I say yes, you have to, because John Collins on paper is not an all-star. His numbers don't pop out at you, but he's an excellent rebounder, an excellent three-point shooter, an excellent interior scorer, a good enough defender. And it's like, how many guys in this league right now can bring you all of those things while also playing the 4 and 5? Very, very few. They have to hold on to Collins and just hope they can fill out the roster, because they did make the conference finals. And if they run it back with DeAndre Hunter back in the rotation, I think this could be a serious team next year. They're probably not beating the Heat, but in all fairness, the Hawks are going to be a team to look out for. All right. Let's look here. Duncan Robinson, 5 years, $90 million. That's a lot of money for a guy that provides you pretty much only one thing. You have to bring him back, because if you lose him, you lose basically all your shooting. Now you have Lowry that equals it out a bit, but he brings a lot to the floor in a Klay Thompson without the defense type role. He's going to catch and shoot a lot. Last season, I think teams sort of figured out how to defend him, so it'll be interesting to see what he's done over the offseason and progressing his offense. I do worry about, what's his ceiling, because Robinson as a player, I think he's already really reached his ceiling. He's a shooter. He's a great shooter, but he's just a shooter. He's not a defender. He's not an interior scorer. He's a guy that you kick it out to and knocks down a three, like Wayne Ellington or Buddy Hield, who we'll get to later. And I really don't understand what they think is going to happen with this sort of paycheck for him. I think in a couple of years we're going to be talking about this, about some of the worst contracts in the NBA, and I think depending on how the Heat do in the next couple of years, this could be one of the worst signings and worst mistakes they made. I would expect them to trade him at some point with Tyler Hero if it just doesn't pan out. I know that's a harsh opinion, and look, I like Duncan Robinson. It's just I don't think that type of money is appropriate for him. Moving on, Chris Paul re-ups 120 million to the Suns. You have to, if you're the Suns, re-sign him. And Chris Paul, you basically took the exact same contract you just had that you just declined and just accepted pretty much the same thing. He's going to be 40 when it expires. He'll probably come in for vet minimum or maybe like a $10 million deal, depending on how he is at the end of this injury-wise. If you're the Suns, he was great in the locker room, transformed the team. They went from no playoffs to the finals over one off season. You have to re-sign him. I don't know if the Suns are getting a lot better. That remains to be seen. I don't know that they're going to be in the top 4 seeds or even top 5 next year. I wouldn't be surprised if they were like a 7 or 8 seed. And that sounds ridiculous, but teams in the West are getting a lot better. The Suns not getting better so far in free agency. And I wonder, if these playoffs did not have as many injuries, would they still be in the finals? My take is no. They were going to lose to the Lakers in the first round. And as much as people want to argue either way, they won the series, but they were not going to win the series against a healthy Lakers team. And at the end of the day, I find it hard to look at the Suns roster and think that this is going to be a championship caliber team again. Moving on, Jeff Green, man, 10 million to the Nuggets. Excellent pickup. Jeff Green's one of those players who can provide you a lot of spacing in small ball 5 lineups. He can run pick and pops and pick and rolls phenomenally, as well as setting screens. If you look at action and transition, he's one of those guys who can really run the floor on the defensive end. He's a phenomenal defender. The Nuggets need defense, and you pair him at the 4 next to Jokic with Murray, assuming he's healthy, and Will Barton, and you have a phenomenal defensive line out on the floor with lots of spacing. They ran McGee off the bench at the 5 last season. I expect them to run Green at the 5, sometimes the 4, obviously. But for this cheap, this is an incredible pickup. I was hoping the Lakers were going to pick Jeff Green up, as I viewed him as a step up with some candidates that they were looking at as well. But the Nuggets picked him up. Great pickup from the Nuggets, man. They're definitely getting a lot better. And if you factor in Aaron Gordon being on the lineup and maybe having a similar role to Jeff Green, I think this is going to be an interesting, especially defensively, team next year, because that was pretty much the one thing they were lacking is defense. I would expect them to maybe be a 2 seed, maybe even a 1 seed next season. Bobby Portis re-signing the Bucks, good signing. Don't have much to say. You know what Bobby Portis is. He's an offensive guy like Kelly Olynyk. He comes in, knocks down a 3, gets a dunk, subs out, right? And he just won a championship. Bobby, give the man his money. Gary Trent, 3 years, $54 million. Another one of these moves where you have to. He's on the roster. He's a good player. You're rebuilding. You have to. Especially with Kyle Lowry being out. I do find it interesting to think about what the roster is going to look like this coming season. I hope they would trade Siakam. But if they don't, you basically have Van Vliet, Trent, Siakam, and then Anunoby maybe, and then it's just ... from there. Maybe Chris Boucher at the 5. They're an interesting young team, but I would personally throw Scotty Barnes out there in the lineup if you trade Siakam. And I think Scotty Barnes with his playmaking and sort of a Draymond Green type role next to Van Vliet and Trent with Boucher at the 5 for some spacing. I think that's genuinely an excellent offensive team. And it all comes down to what their bench is able to do. I would probably go after Dante DiVincenzo for a trade. But I don't see the Raptors, I think they could be like an 8th seed caliber team with the talent they have right now. Just, again, it depends. Gary Trent Jr. is kind of like Duncan Robinson. His ceiling is pretty low. He's a shooter. We'll have to see what his consistency is like, but I like this deal for him. more than I like the Duncan Robinson deal. Moving on, Furkan Korkmaz, another top 5 player in the NBA, 3 years, $15 million. That's an appropriate amount for him. The Sixers, you never really see a lot of Furkan Korkmaz highlights, but he's a good player. He's a good shooter. That's just, again, like Duncan Robinson, that's all he can do. And this is one of the guys where you look at Duncan Robinson's contract and you say, well, Duncan Robinson is a great 3-point shooter, but is he better? Is he in a different stratosphere than Furkan Korkmaz? No. These are similar players. They're both good shooters. And I frankly don't understand why there's such a pay discrepancy. This is a great shooter. Philly needs him in this coming season, and the Heat could have signed him and let Robinson walk, maybe for the sake of future free agency. But we'll have to see. The Sixers are heading towards a rebuild, unfortunately, in my opinion. If Ben Simmons gets traded, maybe not. But if they keep Simmons, I think this roster is going to fall apart by the time Joel Embiid's a free agent. Zach Collins, 3 years, $22 million at the Spurs. This is a very Spurs move, signing Zach Collins to a 3-year deal. He's a very Spurs player. I think he'll fit in the offense pretty nicely. Reminds me of Matt Bonner sometimes from those old Spurs teams. We'll see if he can be healthy, because this man's been in street clothes for his whole damn career at this point, man. He just can't stay healthy. We'll have to see. The Spurs are another messy team. Ariza to the Lakers. The Lakers are my team. I love the Lakers. I don't understand this move. I mean, he gives you, I guess, length at the 3 or the 4, but he's an inconsistent shooter and he's old as dirt. At the very least, he can be a guy that comes in and plays defense. But the problem is, he doesn't have that great of a relationship with LeBron. And then you start to think about, like, well, if someone gets injured, are you going to have Trevor Ariza starting on a championship team? No. We'll have to see how his 3-ball pans out next to whoever's off the bench. And after losing Caruso, they need all the defense they can get. So I don't hate this signing. A signing that I really don't hate is Wayne Ellington to Lakers. This is essentially like 80% of Buddy Hield. And to touch on the Buddy Hield deal, there have been a lot of rumblings about the Sacramento Kings and the Wizards and the Lakers sort of working Dennis Schroeder sign and trade into the deal. And with the Knicks signing Alec Burks and Derrick Rose, they don't have a ton of cap left. I don't know if they have the cap left to sign Schroeder to the type of deal he wants. So the sign and trade's looking more likely. If the Lakers can pull off the sign and trade for Buddy Hield and only lose like Gasol, McKinney, and Schroeder, and they have Buddy Hield next to Russell Westbrook, LeBron James, and Anthony Davis, with Wayne Ellington off the bench, this could be the best team in the league, without a doubt. And this could be a straight shot to the finals for them. But in the here and now, Wayne Ellington's an excellent shooter. Don't get me wrong. Excellent shooter, a bad defender, unfortunately. And this will be interesting. So the Lakers have a lot of guys who aren't excellent on defense on the roster. Nudge, nudge, Russell Westbrook. We'll have to see how this fits. Is he going to start? We'll have to see. You kind of have to start him at this point, We'll get to another signing later that could fill in for Wayne Ellington's place. But look, at the end of the day, man, I'm so happy because Lakers fans, this is a guy that is going to make 3-pointers, and he's not going to make him like Danny Green, where it's like, he's shooting, oh no, oh, it went in. This is a guy where you kick it out to him and it's just green bean all day. He's a phenomenally consistent shooter. If he can stay that way, this is just going to be a fan favorite type guy this whole year. Coming off a career season in Detroit, I mean, this is great news. Speaking of great news, Superman, Dwight Howard, re-upping the Lakers. What a great move, man. I mean, I love that Dwight's back. If he can stay healthy, and I know he's old, but just for the locker room's sake, for the defense's sake, for just enjoyment of watching games' sake, this is a great signing, man. I mean, he's going to catch lobs, block shots, get boards. He's going to do what Dwight does, bring that intensity, bring that tenacity that the Lakers really have been needing. And I'm just going to tell you right now, man, Russell Westbrook, Dwight Howard, LeBron James, Anthony Davis on the court, that is intense smash mouth basketball right there. The rim is going to be crying. All right. Excellent signing. I love this signing. Moving on, 4-year deal with the Knicks, Evan Fournier. Great pickup for them. Defensive guy, knock down the three, create some offense, just what they needed. Moving on. I mean, Knicks fans, I'm sorry to just gloss over Evan Fournier like that, but at the end of the day, it's Evan Fournier. We know who he is. We know what he does. He's a good player. You guys got a good player. D Rose back to the Big Apple. Is he an all-star again? No, probably not. He's getting really old, and we'll see what's going to happen with him. He's not as old as Steph Curry, though. So Curry just came off of MVP caliber season. So if Derrick Rose can have that type of season, I mean, he's not going to be an MVP again, but he could be in the running for an all-star spot, maybe if he's the primary offensive guy. But most likely they start him. But if they don't, he's just, maybe he's in the running for 6 man. Either way, this is a lot of money for Derrick Rose. I mean, with all due respect to D Rose, he doesn't bring what you'd expect out of that contract. He's still a vet minimum guy to me at the end of the day, in my mind. Not to say that he's a bad player, but his three ball is a lot better than it was. He can still get to the rim. He can move sort of laterally. So we're gonna see. All right. This next team is weird mix of inconsistent or average players. And if it all depends on Julius Randle at this point. If he has another excellent season, this is going to be a good team. If he doesn't have a great season, they're not making the playoffs. And I do think Evan Fournier moving back to him will help with that a lot, with consistency and just being a level-headed, strong hand guy. Alex Caruso, oh my God, to Chicago, 4-year, $37 million. Disaster for the Lakers, absolute disaster. One of the worst mistakes that could have happened, although there is a silver lining that I'll get into in a minute. You lose a lot of defense, man. Chicago, congratulations. You're getting an excellent defender, excellent shooter, good playmaker, energy guy that can come off your bench, or you can pretty much play 1 through 3. It's disappointing, man. Really disappointing that the Lakers fumbled this, but he's a hell of a player and he got the bag. If anything, he's underpaid, man. This guy's going to be a max contract level guy, in my opinion, a Mikal Bridges level player by the end of this contract, man. It's just up for this guy. Caruso's absolute total professional. And, at the end of the day, he developed in LA. He won a chip. That's all that counts. Moving on. McGee to the Suns, pointless signing for the Suns. I don't know why they would. I mean, they could have Frank Kaminsky, and I guess JaVale would be playing backup 5 now. He's a good player. JaVale's always been a good player, and people have been unfair to him over his career for various reasons. But man, he's a professional guy. He has fun locker room energy. He can still run the floor, catch lobs, block shots. This is a good player. Do not get me wrong. It's just like if you're Phoenix, this isn't changing your odds of getting back to the finals. It's JaVale McGee. He's at best a backup 5, man. And that's with all due respect. JaVale's one of my all-time favorite players, honestly. He's in my banner on my YouTube channel. I mean, I love JaVale McGee, and I love how he plays. He's just always been such a fun player to watch and is a remarkably skilled mobile center. It's just for Phoenix, this is not what you need. You need like a 6th man off the bench who's going to ignite your offense more than Cameron Payne. You need a Derrick Rose style player, Alec Burks style player, and you don't have that. So we'll see about JaVale. PJ Tucker to the Heat. Like I said this earlier, man, the Miami Heat are intense on defense. They're interesting on offense. Now that he won the chip, he can pretty much go fulfill whatever other aspirations he had. Excellent pickup for the Heat, and the contract's phenomenal too. Devontae Graham to the Pelicans. Zion is gone, folks. This confirms it. He is leaving New Orleans at the first chance he gets. I have no idea why they gave Devontae Graham that much money. I mean, you have to sign Devontae Graham to the sort of contract you can sign him, but I don't know why they would really want him that badly. I mean, you're signing him to a Lonzo Ball type contract, and Lonzo Ball has chemistry with Zion and Ingram. And Devontae Graham's like a shooter who can't play defense or slash inside. Just a confounding move. for me. I mean, it makes sense on, in a way where it's like, this is a shooter. He's a guy you can put out for offense. But I mean, dude, it's Devontae Graham on the Pelicans, and they're not getting better, and they're probably still not in the playoffs. Like, Pelicans fans have to start thinking eventually, like, is Zion still going to be here? I don't think he is. Norman Powell returned to Blazers. They also signed Cody Zeller, which I'm not even going to speak on, which, Mr. Hairline Man is not going to add a lot to your basketball team. Norman Powell, you're still crowding the backcourt with guys who are all really similar in Lillard, McCollum, and now Norman Powell. You have to trade CJ and Nurkic to keep Damian Lillard there, but realistically, Lillard's gone like 10 games in the season, man. And I hate to say that. I hate to be negative, but the Portland Trailblazers do not have much to work with. I mean, look, here's what I think. Worst case scenario is Lillard's gone, but I think if you want to make a desperate move to keep Lillard there, you have to reform the offense to something like 2019 Rockets under D'Antoni. You trade CJ and maybe Nurkic and one of the young guys like Nasir Little or maybe Anthony Simons. You throw them at the Raptors and say, give us Siakam and maybe like a pick. If you can get Siakam back and put him at the 4 and you still have Covington, you can roll out a lineup of like Lillard, Powell, a guy at the 3, and then Siakam and Rocco, and you have an elite defense that can switch and shoot. And you're just going to hope that can win enough games to get to you like maybe the 4 or 3 seed, and you can maybe get to the second round or the conference finals, but that's unrealistic. But bottom line is, if you can have a good regular season and a good playoffs, Lillard stays. But the way the roster is right now, man, you can forget about Damian Lillard sticking around. But even with Chauncey Billups, he's a first-year head coach, right? He's not going to be giving you like the type of outcome you want, which is a championship caliber team. I would have gone after D'Antoni personally before you just go and hire Chauncey Billups, who's a coach that Lillard didn't even want on the team. But what's done is done at this point, man. You're just going to have to go with it. Next deal, Blake Griffin, 1-year deal. Brooklyn, sure. Brooklyn doesn't have depth. They need depth. Is Blake Griffin going to give them depth? I guess. Depends on whether he stays healthy. Kent Bazemore to Lakers. This is a fine signing. I enjoy this signing. Again, all former Lakers so far in free agency, which has been weird. But Bazemore is the type of guy where if you throw him out in a lineup where you have a defensive-minded big, I remember I was reading an article about where the Sacramento Kings defense was one of the best in the league when Bazemore played for the Kings. When you threw out a lineup with Alex Len, they had like a defensive rating in the 90s, which is incredible. But you took Len out of the game, they went back to like league average defensive rating. And as an individual defender, Bazemore is somewhere in the 70th percentile of defenders in this league. So he's a good defender. His three-point shooting has been, on paper, looks good, but in practice, he's inconsistent. At the end of the day, this is a guy that fills a roster spot. He's a vet. His experience in a lot of different situations. He's going to play D. Is he going to lock up anyone? No, but he's a Danny Green type player, and he's I think the first left-handed player that's been on the Lakers roster since LeBron has arrived, which is weird. But this is the first time they have a left-handed player on the roster, so who knows? Maybe they'll win the chip. Let's see. That may be all the signings for the day. To touch on a couple rumors, talking about DeRozan to the Mavs, DeRozan to the Heat. Those have been some things people have been talking about. That's interesting enough. I do think that DeRozan is going to be a guy to watch because he's not as much of an impact player as, a guy like Kyle Lowry, but he can still bring a lot to you. And actually, Wojnarowski just tweeted out something. Big move, Semi Ojeleye, 1-year deal with the Bucks. Whatever, who cares? Unfortunately, no offense to Celtics fans. I know you guys love Semi Ojeleye, but whatever. Like I said with Oladipo, though, Oladipo is similar to DeRozan. He's like poor man's DeRozan, where he could come in on the minimum to a team. Does he go to LA, where he's rumored. Maybe. Does he go to Milwaukee? Maybe. We're really going to have to see at this point. Day 2 of free agency is going to be weird. You still have Rudy Gay and Carmelo Anthony for the Lakers. Patty Mills was a guy the Lakers and in general basketball teams like the Nets are going to go after pretty aggressively, in the Warriors. It is going to be an interesting day 2, man. I'll tell you that. Some stuff's going to happen overnight. But overall, I think you have a lot of teams that are making lateral moves. You see a lot of guys signing with good teams, but they don't really bring them a lot. You see a lot of championship caliber teams not improving markedly from the last season. But here's my key conclusions. Biggest losers are probably the New Orleans Pelicans and the Portland Trail Blazers for not even making lateral moves, but making like downward moves, downgrading their rosters from already being in a bad spot. The biggest winners right now, you have to think it's probably Miami and Los Angeles Lakers. And the Lakers only because having Russell Westbrook on the roster is such a big move that having shooters on the team conceivably is making them better. And as one of the best teams prospectively heading into the season, any moves they make that are net positive just put them up even more. They're in an excellent position, in my opinion. But if they can just finish off this free agency, maybe they swing for Buddy Hield. I doubt it, but they're going to do something. Ideally, they're going to sign a couple guys. Don't worry. We'll have to see. But like I had just said, the Heat and the Lakers are the 2 key teams to look out for over the next couple days of free agency. They still have moves left to make. This has been the first edition of the NBA with KJ. I will have an episode coming out at the end of free agency, checking in with one of my good friends. We're going to discuss the Blazers and the Lakers and a bunch of stuff. Hopefully this podcast can be a thing that people can just tune into and enjoy. I know I enjoy it, even if I'm just talking to the dead air. I've been your host, KJ, and everyone have a good day and peace out. Adios.